The notary's seal was official, but the signature, that's where it gets strange. In the quiet, affluent town of Oakhaven, the death of prominent architect Arthur Penhaligon should have been a simple matter of inheritance. Arthur, a man of meticulous habits and formidable wealth, had no living relatives other than his estranged daughter, Eleanor. Yet, after his sudden passing, his long-standing will, the one everyone expected, simply vanished. Only a hastily produced, new document surfaced, one that left everything to a distant cousin, a man Arthur had barely spoken to in decades. This single discrepancy, a missing document and a suspicious replacement, throws into question not just an inheritance, but the very nature of Arthur's final days. Let me walk you through what happened. The will, dated just a week before Arthur's death, appeared to disinherit Eleanor entirely. This detail matters because it defies everything those closest to Arthur knew about his wishes. The official version claims Arthur, in a sudden change of heart, decided to cut his only child out of his substantial estate. But the paper trail, when examined closely, tells a different story. According to his longtime attorney, Mr. Davies, Arthur had explicitly confirmed his original will just months prior, a document that guaranteed Eleanor everything. That will, the legitimate one, listed clear instructions for his substantial assets, the Oakhaven estate, his private art collection, and a significant amount in various trusts, all designated for Eleanor. Now, the new will, it's a sloppy piece of work. The signatures are similar, yes, but not identical under forensic scrutiny. And the witnesses. Two names no one in Arthur's established professional circle recognized. This is the part that raises questions. Why the secrecy? Why a sudden, uncharacteristic shift in beneficiaries? And why would such a precise man leave such an important document with unknown witnesses, completely bypassing his trusted legal counsel? The timeline doesn't add up. Arthur Penhaligon was known for his orderly life, his fastidious attention to detail. Yet in his final days he purportedly made a seismic change to his legacy, completely out of character and without explanation. The evidence suggests a deliberate attempt to erase his true intentions. A daughter's grief. The heavy oak door of the study stood ajar, a sliver of darkness hinting at the chaos within. It was here, in the heart of the Caldwell estate, that Clara Caldwell, Elias's only daughter, first discovered the scene. Documents scattered, drawers pulled out, a violation not just of property, but of memory. That's where it gets strange, because while Clara's grief was immediate, her actions afterward raised the first significant questions. The official police report filed just hours after the discovery notes Clara's initial statement. She found the study in disarray, the safe, normally hidden behind a portrait, standing open and empty. She described a sense of profound shock and sorrow, tears evident. However, the responding officer's supplementary notes, often overlooked, mentioned something peculiar. Clara, amidst her distress, made a point of stating that her father, Elias, kept meticulous records. She emphasized his unwavering organizational habits. That detail matters. Why, in a moment of such raw emotion, would her mind turn to her father's filing system? It wasn't a casual observation, it was a precise, almost defensive detail. The initial police interviews confirmed she was the first to enter the study after Elias's death. She claimed she immediately noticed the empty safe. But the crime scene photographs tell a different story. They show the room in disarray, yes, but also a pristine dust line around the impression of the safe, indicating it had been removed days, perhaps even a week, before Clara's discovery. What she described as a violation documents, strewn everywhere, could have easily been staged. The paper trail, when we look closer, reveals another inconsistency. Elias Caldwell's personal assistant, a longtime employee named Arthur Finch, testified that Elias had complained about the safe's contents being reviewed by an unauthorized person weeks prior. Yet Clara mentioned no such prior disturbance, only the immediate chaos she found. The timeline doesn't add up. If the safe was emptied earlier, why did Clara report finding it open only then? The official version leaves this unexplained, focusing on the immediate aftermath of Elias's death. But we need to go back and check the record. What prompted Clara's very specific articulation of her father's habits under such duress? This is the part that raises questions, leading us directly to the contents, or rather, the absence of that very safe. The empty safe. The heavy oak door. once a symbol of the family's stability, now stood ajar. Inside, according to the initial police report, lay the master bedroom, a scene of disarray but not of violence. What the first officer on the scene noted immediately was the steel safe, built into the wall behind a painting. It stood open, and it was empty. This wasn't just a break-in. This was targeted. An empty safe in the aftermath of a sudden death changes everything, doesn't it? Eleanor Vance, the recently deceased matriarch, was known for her meticulous handling of finances. Friends and family consistently described her as someone who kept everything in order, especially her most valuable documents. So, the sight of her personal safe, gaping open and stripped bare, immediately raised a red flag for investigators. What was inside this safe, and why was it gone? The initial inventory, cross-referenced with Eleanor's executor, revealed several critical items were missing. We're talking about more than just jewelry or cash. The list included a specific set of bearer bonds, a collection of rare coins, and, most crucially, what was believed to be Eleanor's final updated will. The absence of this will, a document that would dictate the distribution of her considerable estate, sent shockwaves through the investigation. Without it, the default prior will, signed years earlier, would stand, and that, as we will see, created a very different outcome for her heirs. Detective Miller, the lead investigator, noted in his debrief that the safe itself showed no signs of forced entry. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was precise. Someone knew the combination. Or perhaps they had access to the key. That detail matters, because it narrowed the pool of potential suspects significantly. It pointed to someone close, someone trusted, someone with knowledge of Eleanor's most private affairs. The timeline shows that Eleanor's daughter, Sarah, was the first to discover the open safe. Her statement, however, described a scene of general chaos, not a specific focus on the safe. She emphasized her grief, her shock at finding her mother unresponsive. But the physical evidence, the perfectly open safe, nothing else disturbed in the room, tells a different story. This raises an important question. Why did Sarah's account of the scene not match the forensic evidence of a deliberate, calculated theft of specific documents? The plot thickens, piece by piece. Conflicting testimonies. The empty safe. That's where the last chapter left us, a critical piece of the inheritance, simply gone. But while the physical evidence was missing, the verbal accounts began to pile up, creating a tangled web of contradictions, testimonies that directly conflict. Let's look at the evidence. According to Michael Thorne, the eldest son, he last saw his father's will and the family jewels secured in the safe just 2 days before his father's passing. He claims he was checking the contents for insurance purposes. He stated this clearly to Detective Miller on April 12th, a detail recorded in the initial police report. However, his sister, Eleanor, offered a different account. Her statement, taken on April 13th, indicates she witnessed their father, Mr. Elias Thorne, alone in his study, locking the safe himself on the night of April 8th. That's 5 days before his death, not 2. She explicitly mentioned seeing him place a thick manila envelope, presumably the will, inside. She recalled this detail because, as she put it, her father usually asked for help with the safe, due to his failing eyesight. This discrepancy isn't minor. If Michael accessed the safe just 2 days before the death, it changes the entire timeline of access and raises an immediate question. Why would Eleanor not mention this earlier, or why would Michael omit the 5-day gap? His initial statement, as documented, makes no mention of Eleanor or her father's activity with the safe. The police, it seems, initially accepted both accounts without deeply probing the conflict. This is where the narrative begins to fracture. The question of who last saw the safe's contents and when becomes paramount. It shifts the focus from simply what is missing to who had proximity and what they claim to have done. We have 2 key witnesses, siblings, offering fundamentally different chronologies regarding the safe and its contents. One of them, knowingly or unknowingly, presented a version of events that cannot coexist with the other. The official report, surprisingly, allowed both versions to stand for a time, creating a blind spot in the initial investigation. This oversight, we'll see, had critical implications for every step that followed. The offshore account. The conflicting testimonies we examined previously, they were a smokescreen, because the real objective, it seems, was always finances, specifically an offshore account. This is where the story of the missing will, and perhaps the ultimate betrayal, truly takes shape. Let's look at the evidence. The initial police investigation, cursory as it was, missed a crucial detail. The deceased, Arthur Finch, had liquidated a significant portion of his assets just weeks before his death, funds totaling nearly $3 million. According to bank records obtained through a court order, these funds were transferred to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. This is significant because Arthur Finch was known for his meticulous financial habits, every penny accounted for, every transaction documented. Yet, for these $3 million, there was no corresponding record, no explanation in his personal ledgers. Nothing. This raises an important question. Why would a man so scrupulous suddenly move such a large sum of money to an offshore location without any documentation? The official narrative focuses on familial disputes over a local inheritance, but the offshore account that detail points to a far more calculated plan. We uncovered a single, almost unremarkable email from Arthur Finch to his personal lawyer, Martin Green, dated 2 months prior to the transfer. In it, Finch expresses concern over unforeseen circumstances and asks about secure, discreet financial options outside of standard banking. He mentions a sense of urgency. Green's reply confirms the information was provided, but the full exchange was never turned over to the police during their initial inquiry. That's not a small inconsistency. This communication, when contrasted with the bank records, suggests foresight. It suggests a premeditated move, not a spontaneous one. The timing, specifically, is critical. The transfer happened exactly 2 weeks before Arthur Finch's final, disputed will was supposedly drafted. This timeline doesn't add up. Why create a new will detailing local assets, while simultaneously moving the bulk of your fortune beyond its reach? Unless, of course, the new will was never intended to reflect his true intentions regarding the larger sum. The funds were moved. The will appeared, and the truth, it seems, lies somewhere in that deliberately blurred financial trail. A sudden disappearance. The offshore account, a financial ghost suddenly brought into the light, painted a new picture of Richard Thorne's true intentions. Yet, as investigators dug deeper into this complex web of deceit, they found themselves facing an even more unsettling development: a complete disappearance. This is where it gets strange. On the morning of April 12th, 3 days after the revelation of the offshore holdings, Melanie Davies, the secondary beneficiary and Richard's estranged cousin, failed to appear for a scheduled meeting with her attorney. A meeting critical to discussing the implications of the newly discovered account. Her attorney, Mr. Thompson, waited an hour, then 2. By noon, he called her apartment, then her workplace. No answer. This was not like Melanie. Melanie Davies, by all accounts, was a creature of habit. A punctilious accountant for a small firm, her daily routine was almost clockwork precise. The building's security log, later examined by our team, confirms her entry at 7:45 a.m. every workday and departure at 5:30 p.m. But on April 12th, her usual meticulous routine vanished. Her car remained in its designated spot in the parking garage. Inside her apartment, nothing seemed out of place. Her phone, chargers, and wallet were all there. It was as if she simply ceased to exist. Not a single forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Nothing. The official police report, meticulously reviewed, states a voluntary departure with unknown destination as the initial assessment. But what kind of voluntary departure leaves behind everything vital? That detail matters. Security footage from her building showed her entering on the evening of April 11th. She was alone. No one saw her leave the next morning. Her neighbors, interviewed extensively, reported no unusual noises, no arguments, no strange vehicles. The only anomaly? A delivery driver recalling a brief conversation with a man fitting Richard Thorne's description near Melanie's street, just hours before her disappearance. The driver couldn't place the exact time, only that it was sometime late that night. This creates a significant, unsettling gap in the timeline. Why was Richard Thorne, a man with whom Melanie reportedly had sharp disagreements over the inheritance, in the vicinity of her home on the eve of her disappearance? The police initially dismissed this as coincidence, given lack of direct evidence. But the evidence log suggests otherwise. A man connected to the very inheritance central to the current investigation, appearing just as a key figure related to that inheritance vanishes. What are the chances of such a coincidence? And should we simply accept it? The forged signature. The will, dated 2 weeks before the disappearance, named a distant relative as the sole beneficiary. This document, a meticulously prepared, notarized last testament, appeared beyond reproach. However, the signature, that's where it gets strange. We're dealing with what the forensics team would eventually confirm as a forgery. But how, and perhaps more critically, why create a fraudulent will only to have the true inheritor vanish? The initial police report, which we've reviewed, accepts this document at face value, focusing on the absence of Evelyn Reed, not the validity of her last wishes. But the paper trail tells a different story if you know how to read it. Let's look at the evidence. The original will, found by Evelyn Reed's attorney, Mr. Harrison, designated her niece, Eleanor Vance, as the primary beneficiary. Harrison's testimony, crucial to understanding this case, explicitly states he drafted and witnessed the signing of this document. He had known Evelyn for decades, an ongoing professional relationship. So, when the new will surfaced shortly after Evelyn was reported missing, naming a benefactor no one in her inner circle recognized, his alarm bells went off. He reported his concerns, not to the initial investigating officer, but to a private investigator, setting in motion a parallel inquiry. A key piece of evidence in this parallel investigation was a series of comparative analyses. Forensic document examiners, on Harrison's insistence, meticulously compared the signature on the contested will with dozens of Evelyn Reed's verified signatures from bank documents, correspondence, and contracts. What they found was alarming. Inconsistencies in stroke pressure, letter formation, and spacing that suggested deliberate imitation rather than genuine penmanship. The report from lead forensic analyst Dr. Lena Petrova, a document we obtained through our own channels, concluded there was a high probability of non-genuineness. This isn't a small inconsistency. This is the foundation of an entirely new narrative. Because if the will was forged, then the entire motive behind Evelyn's disappearance shifts dramatically. It's no longer just about her vanishing. It's about someone actively attempting to gain control of her assets through deception, possibly even eliminating the true heir in the process. The question then becomes, who stood to gain from this elaborate deception? And more to the point, what became of Eleanor Vance, the niece who was, by all accounts, genuinely loved by Evelyn, and whose inheritance was now stolen? The official investigation, based on early police logs, largely ignored these red flags for months. It focuses on initial leads, on the idea of a voluntary disappearance, or perhaps a random crime. But for Dr. Petrova, the forged signature was a loud, clear signal, a piece of evidence so significant it should have rerouted the entire inquiry. What doesn't add up is the speed at which this fraudulent document was accepted without deeper scrutiny. That detail matters, because it suggests either negligence or something far more deliberate masking the truth. Hidden camera footage. The forged signature was a significant breach, a clear act of deception designed to alter the course of the inheritance. But how far did this deception reach? That's where the hidden camera footage comes into play. According to the police report, a small discreet camera was found tucked away in the deceased's study, cleverly concealed within a decorative clock. This footage, spanning several weeks, offers a silent, unsettling observation. The initial review, as documented in the evidence log, showed nothing overtly suspicious. Days blurred into routine, cleaning staff, occasional visits from neighbors, and the daily life of the household. However, that's not the entire story. Our investigation found a specific segment the official analysis largely dismissed, a fleeting interaction late one evening. John Mercer, the nephew, appears in the study around 2 a.m. He moves directly to the desk where the original will was kept. He isn't searching, he's reaching. He knows exactly where to look. He retrieves what appears to be a document bundle, then quickly replaces it with another. Now, the police interpreted this as Mercer simply tidying. After all, he lived in the house, was often in the study. But the timestamp confirmed by the digital metadata is crucial. This was just days before the official reading of the will, and crucially before the discovery of the alleged forged document. What doesn't add up is the speed, the almost rehearsed precision of his movements. There's no hesitation, no fumbling. It's a purposeful exchange happening under the cloak of night. The camera's low-light capabilities provide a grainy but undeniable visual. We see him looking directly at the clock, almost as if he knows it's there, or at least suspects surveillance. The question then becomes, why would he risk being seen, even by a hidden camera he might not have known about, to swap documents in the dead of night? The footage suggests a level of premeditation far beyond simply forging a signature. It points to a deliberate act of substitution, and that act, witnessed silently by the hidden lens, deepens our understanding of the deception already in play. It tells a different story about John Mercer's involvement, one far more active and calculated than officially stated. The unanswered call. The hidden camera footage had already laid bare a disturbing level of premeditation, a quiet invasion of privacy. But now, we move to the night itself, and to a series of calls that complicate everything. Let's look at the evidence. According to phone records, a call was placed from Elias Thorne's cell phone at 11:23 p.m. on the night of the disappearance. The recipient? Valerie Thorne, his estranged wife. A call that lasted precisely 3 minutes and 18 seconds. That's where it gets strange. Valerie Thorne consistently maintained she was asleep, alone, in her apartment across town. Her statements detail an undisturbed night, a routine evening. Yet, here is a direct call from Elias, hours before his reported disappearance, to her phone, and her phone registered the incoming call. Her service provider confirmed it. The initial police report noted this call, but quickly dismissed it. Their reasoning was simple. Valerie claimed she didn't answer. She provided a plausible explanation later: a heavy sleeper, silenced phone. No further investigation was deemed necessary. But this detail matters. The timeline shows Elias making an active attempt to contact her. Why? And if she was truly asleep, why would the call log suddenly become so pivotal to our understanding now? Because the previous chapter's footage, the one showing the unsettling preparation, placed Elias in his study, making this call from his home, alone, just as the recording started. It wasn't a random, late-night impulse from an unknown location. It was from his secure private space. And it begs the question, what could compel him to call Valerie after weeks of strained silence, moments before he vanished? We need to go back and check the record. What could have been discussed in those 3 minutes, 18 seconds? Or, if Valerie truly didn't answer, what was the motive behind the call itself? Police considered it a non-event. We don't. This unanswered call, or perhaps an answered call that was never fully disclosed, leaves a critical gap in the official version of events. It's a silence that speaks volumes. Justice delayed. The gavel fell, a sharp echoing sound in the hushed courtroom. Guilty. The verdict was definitive, yet it offered little comfort. 7 years had passed since the disappearance of Margaret Davies' original will, 7 years of legal battles, accusations, and a family torn apart by greed. The court found Elias Thorne, Margaret's estranged nephew, culpable in the destruction of that critical document, a document that would have left the bulk of her estate to charity, bypassing him entirely. But even with a conviction, the full truth remained elusive. We are left with fragments, with a shadow of what really occurred, and the nagging feeling that some pieces were deliberately left off the record. Now, as we close this case file, let's step back and consider the broader strokes of this inheritance murder. What does the story of Margaret Davies and Elias Thorne tell us about human nature when vast sums of money are on the line? It's a narrative not uncommon: family feuds over estates, a tale as old as time. However, this case goes deeper, exposing the cracks in legal systems, the manipulations that can occur under the radar, and the terrifying efficiency of a perpetrator driven by desperation. The official version, with Elias Thorne behind bars, provides a legal resolution, but it scarcely addresses the meticulous planning, the layers of deceit, and the sheer audacity involved in making a will simply vanish. That detail matters. We've reviewed the timelines, examined the conflicting statements, and traced the paper trail. What stands out is not just the act itself, but the almost clinical detachment with which it was executed. The use of a falsified notary, the carefully constructed alibis, the way Thorne systematically isolated Margaret in her final months to control her narrative, these are not the actions of impulsive anger, but of cold calculation. Justice, in this instance, was delayed, and arguably incomplete. It gave a name to the guilty, but it failed to fully unravel the psychological maze through which the truth was obscured, and that leaves us with an unsettling question. How many other critical documents, how many other last wishes simply disappear without a trace because the stakes are high enough for someone to make them do so? So, while the courts have closed the book on Elias Thorne, the evidence log keeps searching. Case closed. For now. If you found this investigation compelling, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the evidence log for more in-depth analyses, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? You can also click one of the videos on your screen now to continue exploring more cases with the evidence log. We'll keep digging. Until then, keep questioning everything.